Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Tranquility session. Tranquility is a raw black. It's a raw black from Yunnan Province, and it's specifically from Nano Mountains. Now, last week, we talked about tea from Jingmai Mountains. Nano is even further south than Jingmai. It's closer to the border of Burma. And actually, it really is not all that far away from Xishuangbanna, which is the main city that's closest to Burma. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the position, but it doesn't tell you the history. It doesn't give you a sense of why is the history of Nanoa different from the history of Jingmai? Why is it different from so many of the other tea mountains in the area? And is it famous? Maybe it's not famous. Maybe we're just talking about one of those nondescript tea mountains, and yet maybe not. So let's understand that Nano a little bit. First off, it's one ethnicity, essentially, Hani people. So it's an indigenous peoples. This indigenous peoples worships tea trees or worships tea in general. They built their life around tea. They've got several different areas, three main areas where old and ancient trees are growing. And ironically, by coincidence, they have 9 villages, just like Chiang Mai last week had 9 villages that were spread out in the mountain. And Nano, by coincidence, actually does have 9 villages. Their villages look very differently, by the way. So, remembering last week when we were talking about Chiang Mai and how it achieved this status of really integrating closely in with nature, building their houses on wooden stilts, and having several different indigenous peoples in the same area. So when you go to Nano, is it easy to find? Well, this is a similarity with Chiang Mai. Nothing is easy to find in this area, but it eventually becomes findable. And so you find it, you go there, and right away you're struck by the fact that the houses look different. They look a little bit more modern. Oh, that's false. Let me back that up. I shouldn't have said modern because that assumes a cultural judgment. What I should say is they resemble more of the housing that you would see all over Yunnan, rather than the very distinctly indigenous housing that we saw last week, or that we talked about last week in Jingmai. So that was one of the things that struck us right away. The housing, oh, this is very recognizable. It's very traditional for Yunnan, but it's not an indigenous particular type of housing. So that's one thing. The second thing about Nano, which is really interesting, is again, like Jingmai, they separated the housing, but at a different angle than Jingmai did. Jingmai basically is, I don't want to use these directions because the directions are a little misleading, but what I will say is they're down the mountain and the tea trees are up the mountain. So that's the relationship. In Nanoa, the houses are actually up the mountain and the tea trees are down the mountain, but they don't allow sewage or anything to drain in that direction. So they haven't wrecked their tea fields or tea trees because they've been careful about the whole way that everything is arranged. And actually, historically, in that area, and so what area am I talking about? In the area that's not that far away from the Burmese border, within 30 miles of the Burmese border, almost all the indigenous sets of people have designed really good ways to relate to the tea groves themselves. So that's really important because I've talked to you before about one place that didn't do that and had runoff into the tea trees. It was a very famous place, but in reconstruction, as they got more money, what they did is they, in effect, ruined quite a bit of their tea resources because they had runoff into the tea resources, and it was just a disaster. Non-NOAA has been very careful. So, what's Non-NOAA's claim to fame? So they advertise themselves as having the longest cultivated trees in all of China. Now you have to think about this statement for a minute, because when I was doing my research on Non-NOAA, I read that statement and I read it so fast, right away my brain registered, that's just simply not true. But then I went back and thought about what that statement means. And what they mean is they grew trees from 800 to 1,000 years ago. They planted trees from 800 to 1,000 years ago and have continuously harvested those trees and cut back and pruned and developed more land. And so from that perspective, they can claim that. And the reason that my mind initially flipped at that was the fact that in the Ival Mountains, they have trees that are over 2,000 years old. But those trees weren't planted by the indigenous peoples. Those trees existed before the indigenous peoples did. And so there is some question as to when they actually got there. And that's the difference from Non-NOAA in terms of that type of phraseology. However, there are other differences, and these are terroir differences. One of the main differences is the soil in Non-NOAA is very red. And so it's got a lot of elements in it that some of the other soils that have trees, we don't see soil like that often. And that influences, of course, flavor. The other thing that Non-NOAA has done very successfully, perhaps outside of Yiwu, maybe the most successfully of any of the tea mountains, is they've really carefully worked with tea scientists over these last 20, 30 years and got it right. And what do I mean when I say got it right? They've simplified some of the processes and actually the craft process of picking, you can't simplify. I mean, in their case, at the premium level, it's a bud and two leaves, period. And that's hand-picked, period. But after the hand-picking, they modernized some of the machinery with the eye towards making it a little bit more standard and making it less judgment batch by batch. So from a consumer standpoint, replicability is nice, especially if what you're trying to replicate is great in the first place. And so they've worked on that more so, I think, from our observation than almost any of these other tea mountains. So that's one of the differences. The second difference is an attitudinal difference. It's really interesting because all these tea mountains that we go to, we're friends with everybody. We love being out there. They love seeing us. I mean, it's a really mutual, fun, and respectful relationship. Non-NOAA is not an exception, but their grasp of us is very different than most of the farmers and leaders of the other tea mountains. So what is this difference? They look at us and they hear us, so to speak. When we said the first year that we went up there, it's very nice that you're doing this for us. Yes, we want to enjoy how you normally enjoy the tea. We're taking notes and so forth. And then the question comes up from their side. Now, you said, that's us, how we're enjoying the tea. How do you enjoy the tea? So they actually asked that question. And they were really fascinated as we talked about Big Cup. And then they asked the boss, they said, can you demonstrate? So she demonstrates. And so after that first year, when they observed, every subsequent year, we show up again happy. It's fun to see. How's the year been? How's the family? All that stuff. And then they turn it over to us. Here's what the new crop is this year. You make it the way you make it. And so it's really hilarious because normally, wherever we go, normally, this is the only place where it's not that this way. They are proud of what they've done and they're proud to show us, and we're actually glad to receive it in the way that they enjoy because we learn from that. But in their case, they realize that that's not what we're doing here. And right away, they turn it over to us. So a fun group, they're younger. It's funny. It's a village which has been around for probably 1,000 years, or a set of villages which has been around for 1,000 years. And yet, the people that we interact with, for whatever reason, and it's probably a reason to do with demographics in recent years. But what's strange is that you don't have the seniority factor in this village. And, all these villages you go to, usually there's one really senior person, and senior in knowledge, senior in lineage, sometimes actually senior in age, most of the time senior in age, and they have a certain charisma that controls every interaction that we have with them. Here, it's these young chaps, our young families. And it's really interesting. It's really fun because there's just a different spirit. Yes.
You had mentioned in previous presentations how in some locations there's maybe a concern, tea growing locations, about younglings not sticking around to continue the craft. And this sounds as if it's the complete opposite in this location. Wondering if you have a sense about how that can be.
This is a great question, a great observation. So the observation is that having all these younglings around seems counterintuitive to what we've talked about in all these previous sessions, because we have talked about the flight of young people away from tea farms. They want to go to bigger places. They want to find partners from bigger places. They want a different world. I have a feeling and it's different here. You're right. There is a feeling that it's different here. And I have a feeling that has to do with the fact that it's one indigenous peoples rather than groups of several indigenous peoples and some Han people. Here, all you see basically is this one group, Hani indigenous people. And so perhaps there's more of a feeling of, hey, this is home. Home is enriching us. We love our honey culture. We're not going anywhere. This is where we want to be. And that's a great catch in that regard, because we definitely, we get the feel, especially when we're out in the tea fields with the tea trees. Oh yeah, this has lineage. But when we're with the younglings, it's so apparently casual and it just has a different feel. And I think that that's partially and in great part because of honey culture. And honey culture is very welcoming. And we come there and it feels like family. It really does. And so from the top of the hill, we go down into the tea tree area. So remember, we have a tea from Nano called Newman, Numen. And after it, there is Pompoa in '07. Well, '07 is easy because that's the year that it was formed into a cake. It was actually harvested in '05 or '06, but it was formed in cakes in '07. But Pompoa for Westerners really isn't easy. And yet in China, instantly, anybody who drinks, whether it's fully fermented or raw black, they hear Pompoa. Oh, that's non-Noa. And that's not just non-Noa, that's non-Noa. The most famous of the three tea tree areas. They have about, let me see if I remember, yes, about 2,700 tea trees, 1,100 of which are very old or ancient tea trees. And so this area is famous in the tea elite world. It's famous to us, and it's famous to aficionados who are looking for really interesting raw black. What makes Bonplois so interesting? Well, I've started to talk about the soil. That's one thing. Second thing, that the varietals that grow there have a very particular taste. And we'll taste that this morning. I'm not going to give away what that taste is, but it's very distinctive. And that in the raw tea world, raw black tea world, is highly sought after. The other thing that's distinctive is, again, I talked about this continuous cultivation over a period of 800 to 1,000 years. So in a way, it's like Jing Mai last week, but from a different angle. And that is that there's been this deep human interaction. And there is a love for these trees. They have segregated the trees that are oldest and then really protected the trees that they feel have the most interesting flavor. You can't even get up next to it unless you're with one of the farmers, and then he opens the gate and go right on up to it. But normally you don't get right next to it. And those trees, unlike Isla Mountains, okay, so let's make one thing very clear here. Isla Mountains, when we talk about the 2,000 plus year trees, those have trunks that are wider than you can put your arms around. There are no tea trees in Nanoa that you can't put your arms around. So the trunks are smaller. That's one thing. In Isla, those trees grow very tall. Those trees grow, at a minimum 40, 50 feet, maximum about 80 feet. Well, in Nanoa, the tallest tree I think we saw was about 20 or 25 feet. So the look and feel of the area is different. And this brings something else. And now I'm glad that I'm getting so deep into this, because in Isla, everything is growing around those trees. They really are in a full ecological orchestra. In Nanoa, yes, you have the trees, but you don't have so many other plants growing among the trees. This doesn't mean they're growing in rows. They are not growing in rows. They are growing like a forest. It's just that there's not that many other varietals of things that are growing there. Yeah.
Is this a conscious, or is this part of been, do you know whether this has been part of the cultivation process over these many, many years of active engagement by the indigenous peoples, are they weeding out the influences possibly of other types of plants?
Great question. So this is a question about why would that exist that way? Are the indigenous, the Hani people, are they purposefully kind of keeping things neat and clean around the tea tree forest? And again, it's not planted like a row, but it is very, very relatively clean. And yes, it is our opinion that they have fostered this in a variety of ways, and they fostered it purposefully. And again, that's why I think that this statement that I talked to you about in the beginning, which at first, like I said, when I heard that, I said, that's just false. But then as I thought more and more about it, no, they actively have cultivated this almost without doing what we do today or what tea farmers do today. When you go to areas where tea farmers, say in Anhui or Zhejiang province, or even in some parts of Fujian province or Yunnan province, you see row after row after row. And that's called cultivating, and it is a type of cultivating. And it's a type of cultivating that relies on today's agricultural science. When you see these trees growing the way they're growing, that is cultivating from an ancient perspective. And so it's the science has changed and the approach has changed, but there's huge, huge value to what they're doing in non-oil. So what is this huge value to you as a consumer? I had a friend call me recently from China, and they said, hey, I know that the two of you, you know your teas, and you know, I'm wondering if you can do me a favor. Okay, yeah. I'm always up for favors. Can you get Tibetan tea? And so that's kind of a non sequitur right away. Tibetan tea. A, do they grow tea in Tibet? No. B, how do they drink tea in Tibet? Well, they usually add something to it, like yak milk or spices. So that tea, by its very nature, has to be market tea. All right, so let's think a little bit about market tea, especially in comparison to the tea at non-oil. So one of the things that's a characteristic about lots of market tea is the huge use of fertilizers, and not necessarily in a very good way. B, pesticide use. C, other types of chemical usages to try and increase yield or color or whatever it is they're trying to do. These are market teas, and they're handled this way. So in non-oil, and this is the thing we look for in every village. What are they doing agriculturally? Well, when you're cultivating an orchard, which is really what they're doing, they're cultivating, we usually use the word, I understand for those of you who are technical, wait a minute, we're not talking about walnuts and we're not talking about peaches and so forth. But the point being, it's tea trees. And the whole thing here is ask yourself a question. Are they using fertilizers for these trees? Did they ever use fertilizer for these trees? The answer is no. Did they ever use pesticides for these trees? The answer is no. So when you talk about that cultivation of a tree, tea tree nature, and a continuous cultivation of 1,000 years, now it's coming into focus of why it's special. Now you know why everybody in China who knows their teas says to themselves, I want that. Because I know it's safe. Oh, and by the way, it might taste good too. Safe and taste good. That's pretty good. Let's see how I'm doing. Oh, still safe, but just barely. All right, so let's go ahead and take a short commercial break here. And I'll see you in 10 seconds. I'm always so happy for this time to get myself ready to talk about the next part, which is my favorite part, which is having the tea master demonstrate how this tea is to be brewed and bring out the best flavors and so forth. Absolutely my favorite part. And then I'm always surprised in a great way about how beautiful the tea master. The costume is always what I'm looking for as she comes to brew, because it's not just it has to taste good. The aesthetics all the way around. They have to be in order too. So it gives me great pleasure to bring Biju tea master.
Hi, good morning, everyone. We do rub like tea, huh? So today the best tea from the the Nanluo, in Yunnan Province, China. So low temperature, okay. So 6 grams. You have no friend.
真挺没有。
Okay. I prepare 了哈。Yeah. 茶海 tea 茶汁
So these tools are always good if you have them, but if you don't, the reason for these tools to exist is to prevent hand moisture or lotion or odors from getting on the tea. So anything that you can do to do that, anything you can do to replicate something like that with that in mind, works just fine. We use 3 cups so that we can lower the water temperature, dissipate the steam, aerate the water faster. But you can use 2 cups, and that works just fine. And most importantly of all, you see there's a rhythm to this. Being present at the end of the day is what we're teaching here. And of course, we give you the outlines of the tea itself, the history, the processing, but being present and learning how to appreciate this wonderful tea. That's really the key to this. And so in order to get there, you need rhythm. And it's your own rhythm, by the way. It's not the Biju rhythm. And horrors, it's not the understudy rhythm. You don't want that rhythm. You want a Biju-like rhythm. They're kind of a beautiful evenness. Everything in its place, making sure the water's getting down to the right temperature. Ensure the cups are completely clean. Gonna heat the tea leaves. Shaking. Make sure all the leaves are heated. Putting the water back into the kettle because the kettle has a nice spout. And that was 6 grams, by the way. And this is 3 minutes. All right. And so you see kind of a beautiful pour, isn't it? Because you have leaves at the top, you have leaves at the bottom, standing straight up. It's really a beautiful, beautiful appearance. Aesthetics, as it turns out, are important. But at the end of the day, taste first, aesthetics next. So this is a spring pick. In Nanoa, most of the tea that's produced is spring pick only. And typically this is true with tea trees because you're not going to, generally speaking, want to pick for a fall pick. The other thing is there's an economic reason involved with this as well, because in the old days, you might have several picks, but that's when tea wasn't netting you much money. These days, especially in areas like this, their houses are very nice houses, and their standard of living is a very nice standard of living. And it's because this tea is so well recognized that people pay good money for this, as they should. And as the movement in China has become a little bit more conscious about making sure that you eat healthy, trying to make sure that you get stuff that hasn't been sprayed or overly fertilized, all of those factors come into play because the elite, that's what they want. And they'll pay anything, not anything, but you catch where I'm going. They'll pay a lot to achieve them because they are recognizing, and this trend is only going to continue because so much of Chinese agriculture is industrialized, which means that these more craft-like segments of agriculture, they continue to be sought after, but there's less and less compared to the whole. And so the result is it's a dearer and dearer product. And so Nanoa, again, is already famous and has been for a number of years. We talked about why in terms of the terroir. This place is about 4,200 feet above sea level. It gets about 80 inches of rain a year. And yet, for the most part, the temperature is relatively milder. All right, timer has gone off. Tea master separates the leaves from the tea water. And wow, we have a very beautiful tranquility. So let's enter the tea arena and let's see what this is like. Remember, at first sip, we're looking for astringency, aftertaste, and energetics. And since it's a relatively lower temperature, I can take a bigger sip. Okay, we've got some astringency. And by the way, though I am not taking notes, I sure hope you're taking notes when you're going through this, because I take notes when I'm in China. So I've got piles and piles of notes. You should take notes because week by week, we're doing different raw blacks over this next few weeks. And this gives you a chance to try and remember or remind yourself of what you tasted before. All right. Take a second sip, verify what was in the first sip. Focus also on flavor and aroma. You're in for a treat. It's your turn to brew. Remember to set your timer for 3 minutes. Make sure your glasses are completely clean. And develop your rhythm. So not in a hurry, just steady, not missing steps. Put the tea leaves in the heated cup. Shake the cup. Pour on the sides. And the recipient cup. Oh, 3. Yes, of course. I knew that. Yep. All right. So again, you start right off noticing it wasn't the fluke last time. We've got part of the forest standing, part of the forest above. You already see color coming into the picture. What you notice about these leaves is that they're big, they're quite large. And Nanoa is known to have the tea forests have large leaves. And it's really interesting because it isn't age which determines size, it's varietal. So we've seen the oldest known tree in the world, around 3,500 years. The leaves are compared to most of the leaves in this area, small. It's in another area in Yunnan, it's in Fengqing. And that was one of the most surprising things because when we looked at those leaves, oh, too small. But when you look at the non-no leaves, yeah, those trees aren't behemoths, but those leaves are very large. Rich watershed, they have a low enough temperature. So it would almost be like living in the Bay Area, especially the way the Bay Area has been this year. And so we're talking in the high 60s, low 70s, very pleasant for most of the year. What's different, of course, is that there's more rain. There is more rain, and on those rainy days, you have fog, which the tea leaves love, and it's just a relatively shorter hot season. And so the result is you, along with the terroir, end up with actually a very different result with this tea. And so that's one of the other reasons and that this is different. And so when you ask yourself, Okay. These 6 mountains are within 50 miles of each other. How come there's all these differences? Well, again, they have, just like Northern California, microclimates. You go through the tunnel and you're in blazing Orinda right away. On this side, you've got that fog bank. So it's the same sense of this driven by microclimates. All right, your timer has gone off. You're separating the tea leaves from the tea water. And again, take a look at the color, because the color is really, really nice in this. And this, by the way,这个是都唱出去6年还是7年？是 Tranquility, yeah, 应该8年了吧？7、8年. Okay, 7 or 8 years old. We got this 7 or 8 years ago, and the whole deal with this is that you're going to have a distinctiveness of taste that's different than what you had last week. Yeah. So enter the quality arena and don't talk while you're entering it, as I just tried to do. The other thing about non-Noab, which is interesting, from a bug standpoint, they have some of the largest flying bugs that I've seen. And I'm sure that this is a microclimate local phenomena. And most of these bugs look like there are wasps of some sort, so they're huge.
Do they also have honeybees in addition to wasps that you've noticed, which presumably are also huge, but
They do have honeybees, and they are a different size, but they, and coloration, because some of them are a little darker. But you don't have there is no sense of fear evoked by the honeybees. The wasps are enough to get your attention, your full attention. Fortunately, I've never been stung by one, and no one, no group that we've taken before has had that. Yes.
Rob observes the warm leaves had a scent comprised of umami with hints of malt and chocolate. The steeped leaves were vegetal, floral. The tea water smelled like cider. If cider can be made from the ocean, it had a raw black smell, but its edges were rounded.
So Rob has a really interesting take on this. And he said, if cider could be made with ocean water as the base, this has some remnants of that from a tea water perspective, because he notes the umami, he notes a bit of florality, also that cidery taste, and in the dry leaves, he detects hints of chocolate. So what this is telling you, and thank you, Rob, what this is telling you is that there are a lot of complex flavors in this. And as you pull this apart, you'll begin to notice some trends. Yes.
Jennifer says the wet leaves have a trace of fruit to them. Though I'm having a hard time identifying the precise fruit of which it reminds me, it's fresh and feels like maybe nectarine or peach.
So Jennifer talks about freshness, hints of maybe nectarine or peach, certainly a fruit. And this is really getting down to how the Chinese would talk about this. You haven't used the exact words yet, but now we're getting the feeling of how they would talk about this. And that's a good observation. It's a real good observation. So as you're thinking about it, one of the reasons that non-noa tea is so famous throughout China is that hint of fruit, and they would say slash honey. And so from their perspective, it's both fruit and a slight hint of sweetness. Very distinctive. The other thing that should be apparent is in many ways, there's a bit of juiciness with this. So this is extremely drinkable. And remembering that this pick is different than the pick you had last week. This pick is a bud and two leaves.
Jennifer adds, when I first poured my tea, the tea liquor was very full and cloudy, no bubbles on the top. However, bubbles have developed on the top. Was that the way I poured or something about this tea?
Remembering that I've had my tea in my cup longer. As I look down, no bubbles, but I've had mine for probably 5 or 6 more minutes than you have. And so I'm unclear. There were bubbles right at the beginning, but I think that that was just a pouring mechanism. I'm not sure that the leaves themselves produced anything unusual in relationship to bubbles. But it's always good to call that stuff out. Yes.
Rob says the astringency is trying to trick me into thinking this is like one of those yellow teas that have hints of popcorn.
Huh. Now, this is a really good comment because Rob says the astringency is playing tricks on his tongue. And the Chinese would agree with that. That is one of the ways they talk about this tea in terms of the astringency kind of coming in and out. And so he compared it to a little bit of a popcorny yellow tea.
Jennifer says, I'm picking up a lovely truffle honey flavor in the tea liquor.
There you go. Now, from a Chinese perspective, this they would understand right away. Truffle honey flavor. And without question, especially the non-oil raw black, almost, well, for all the famous places in non-oil, almost all of that has some hint of sweetness, and it's not a sugary sweetness as much as it is a fruity sweetness. So that's hence the honey is how they frequently talk about that. And that's how particularly Bonpo tea is talked about in China. All right. I think you've gotten the main elements of this. The key is we're dealing with a forest that's been continually cultivated for 1,000 years. We're dealing with a tea, a raw black that's 7 or 8 years old. And so you see it's mellowing out fast. And one of the things to remember is we have this as a loose leaf raw black, which means it's mellowing out faster than if it had been a cake. Because they do cakes of this, and the cake would have a different flavor than this. So, as usual, all of you have done a wonderful job. And I think that this exploration of raw blacks is getting you to a different understanding level of what's possible with the raw black. And certainly in the early years when we did the raw blacks, there was more of a sharpness, a little less smooth and mellow, and it's just not quite the development of flavors that there are today. Yes.
Jennifer adds, just gotta say, this is a very drinkable and enjoyable raw black for me. And Stacy says, I'm already at the bottom of the cup and get the fruity aspect, but cannot yet identify the fruit.
Yeah, that's good observation. Stacy says she's drunk all the way through the cup already, gets that fruity flavor at the bottom of the cup, can't exactly identify the fruit, which is fine because we're all going to use different terms. But the fact that there is fruit, yeah, everybody in China would agree with that. And Jennifer talked about how pleasant as a raw black this is. Yes.
Jennifer also says there's more of a balance between the umami and fruit for me in this one.
Oh, great catch. Yep. Rob noted in the beginning umami, cider, fruit. Jennifer says, hey, this is really a balance that's so unusual of fruit. It's a nice balance of the fruit and the umami flavor. That's a great catch and a great call. And that balance is achieved over time. Because when we first had this, you wouldn't have said that. This is now got to a point where, yeah, I get that. Yeah.
And E is a me too on Jennifer's comments. And Rob adds, the flavor is like an orange rind, the kind that is about to be processed into a liqueur like curacao.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's really good. And I think that's helpful for everybody. So Rob, we've all been talking about fruit and saying, yeah, there's fruit. Well, what fruit? I'm not quite sure. Maybe nectar, maybe peach, maybe a little bit of apple with the cider. And Rob said that maybe it's really more aligned with orange rind, particularly if it's being prepared for liqueur. So you're all getting this sense over a spectrum. There's fruit in here, without question. And you're all getting that it's drinkable. And part of what makes it drinkable is that umami flavor doesn't overwhelm you. It's balanced, as Jennifer said. And it blends with that fruit flavor as if the two of them are meant to be together. And that's really what's special about Tranquility. And Tranquility, this is not an accident, this name, because as raw blacks go, first off, almost all the non-no's make you feel tranquil. They make you feel good, make you feel, hey, this is mellow, this is drinkable. And Tranquility in particular, even when we first got it, it's like, oh yeah, even if it's not 100% tranquil now, it's going to be. And we could tell that from the start. As usual, all of you have plumbed deep and come up with interesting comments about this tea. This is an interesting tea. I know that some of you, raw black isn't your favorite, but I appreciate very much the fact that you are being present and you're getting the elements which attract us to raw black. So that's a great thing. Remember, again, I love all my children equally. There is no question. Kind of no question. However, However, that said, which one am I going to have on a particular day? Well, that's a different question. I am in the mood some days for raw blacks. And your discussion today is exactly why I'm in the mood for that some days. So great job. So tranquility. Now, maybe we should get the energy level up next week. Maybe we should do energy. Oh, wait a minute. There is no energy. Well, let's say ardor. Let's have some ardor next week. Your responsibility this week? A, no COVID, no colds, no confusion, no chaos, the 4 C's. None of that for you all this week. The 5th C, which is the one we're all looking for, comfort. That's what we have this week. See you next week. Bye-bye now.
Oops.